Let's talk about Shadow of War for a second, because Shadow of Mordor was my favorite game the year it came out, seriously. This is one of the games I enjoyed the most this year. Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor. And it's so good. Oh my god. It was just such a nice surprise, and it was so fun, and the Nemesis system was so awesome, but it was also very, very far from Lord of the Rings. It felt very different. And right off the bat, I think that's one of the most notable things with Shadow of War, is that it does actually feel a bit more like Lord of the Rings this time, from the music to the presentation to the aesthetic to some characters showing up and just kind of the basic events and enemies you fight. It just feels more like a Lord of the Rings game, and not like the last game where it kind of felt like vaguely Tolkien, but kind of just like the cover of a Slayer album. Here, it's definitely Tolkien turned up to 11. Like, it's Lord of the Rings as told by like a monster truck announcer. It's ridiculous. It does take a lot of liberties that I've seen piss off a lot of fans who read the books and stuff. I'm really just into the movies. I read The Hobbit, I read The Fellowship. I didn't read everything that Tolkien has written. So for me, someone going into it with knowledge, but not like with an overload of knowledge, it didn't piss me off too much. It does feel distinctly different at times, but it still feels in the vein of Lord of the Rings, just maybe a little crazier. And honestly, the fact that maybe it bastardizes some Lord of the Rings stuff is actually the least controversial thing about it. But we'll get to that. Honestly, this game is very much the Shadow of Mordor just turned up and added a million systems on top of it. Like, this game has system upon system upon system tacked onto it that I was actually worried when I had played it like at E3 and stuff, and when I had heard about it, I was like, this is a lot going on for this game, man. I don't know about this. But now, playing it, for many, many, many hours, it makes sense. Basically, what it did is took the original game, which the bones were good. It had the Nemesis system, which was exciting, and it had Arkham combat, but with swords in the Lord of the Rings universe. Now it takes that and adds a lot of stuff on top of it to make it feel like its own. It adds RPG and strategy elements to really make it feel like its own game, not just kind of like a copy and derivative of other games, you know? Now, I will say, sometimes in games I get really bothered when there's so much going on, when you just have to go through menus and annoying pop-ups keep telling you to do things, and it's annoying as hell, and the game's interface is cluttered, and it reminds you very much that it's a video game. But I think all these new elements really work. The skill tree, number one, is way more fleshed out this time around. There's a lot of good stuff to unlock that's pretty damn exciting. Number two, there's loot, which every game has loot now, and it's starting to feel a little like, okay, whatever, I just have to do this. But here, there's actually some good stuff, and the way it adds to your power level does work. I like it. They handled it fine. Finding loot is fine. And the Nemesis system now, which is deeper and a bit more complex, and there's just way more things that can happen within the system with these orcs that are your enemies, and they can come back from the dead and fight you again or ambush you, or now you can really capture them and make them fight for you. You're building your own army, and the fact that there's like a negative Nemesis system and a positive Nemesis system, and the fact that you can play around with them and make them fight together kind of like action figures, that works for me. I think that's actually really brilliant in a game that at times when you're playing it kind of does feel a little bit like Shadow of Mordor 1.5, just because a lot of the combat animations and sound effects are the same. Besides that, everything else just makes it feel really like a whole new game. This Nemesis system now is crazy because I love the way the systems work with using the environment and stealth and action and all these different little things and different weapon types and different enemies and your allies and traps. So much stuff you could do to kind of create your own stories within this Nemesis system. It's especially great when something crazy happens, like say you blow up a guy and you set him on fire and he burns to death, and then he comes back and he's all burned and pissed off. I live for that shit. But now, coupled with the fact that you can have your own guys swoop in at the nick of time and save you and like create a new story during a siege, that is great. And that is honestly what'll keep you playing for a really long time. The main quest, like 20 hours, but there's so much going on that you're gonna be playing the game for a lot longer. If you are the type of person that looks at a big open world map and sees a bunch of things to do, that's kind of busy work. If you're not that type of person, this is going to be a turnoff. It's 50-50. Some people like it, some people don't. I do for specific games, and here it works for me for the most part. There are side quests, there are Nemesis quests and stuff in the Nemesis system that all still manage to feel kind of dynamic, and some of it, while there's a lot of collectathon shit, it feels like there's some busy work, but some really good stuff that's worth checking out too. And the whole game is interesting because you're essentially just out Sauroning Sauron himself. You're doing the same thing. You're making your own towers. You're looking around with a fire eye yourself. You're building this army me. You're basically taking advantage of these dumb idiot orcs to do your bidding and to do terrible things. You're doing it in the name of good, which is cool, but the story goes places with that I was really surprised. I actually thought the story would take a backseat here, because by the time Shadow of Mordor wrapped up, I was like, what the fuck happened? I fought Sauron? Okay, that was okay. Here, there's like a beginning and an end, and it feels a little more cohesive. I like where it goes. Now, you have to grind through for that extra ending, because, whew, it really wraps things up and goes places you would not expect, but I thought it was pretty interesting. I thought it was cool. I like the character of Talion, even though he's pretty generic. You gotta love Troy Baker. I don't know, man. There's little things here and there, like the cutscenes bother me. The fact that your armor choice doesn't translate over to a cutscene, and, you know, some of the jumping stuff and, like, when you attach to ledges feels kind of like the earlier Assassin's Creed games where it was really crappy and, like, your guy would never really grab where you needed to grab. There's little stuff like that, but otherwise, I think this is a really, really fun game. It's meaty. There's a lot to do. I love that combat, because when you get good combo streaks going, it feels good. The stealth is way too accessible, but I don't really sneak around, because it's better to just stab orcs to death. Like, they're all hanging out drinking, you run up and stab one to death with a brutalize move, and they all run away in fear. It feels obnoxious. You feel like such an asshole killing all these orcs, and I love it. Now we gotta talk about the microtransactions, which is something I try not to hit too much in my reviews. I try not to harp on that. I think there are other people that can discuss it much better than I can. There are some things here with these microtransactions that set a bad precedent. I do not think the game is pay to win at all. A lot of people have been asking me a lot of things, and a lot of info out there before the game came out led people to believe that, but the game, to me, is not pay to win at all. And I, at any instance, did not feel compelled to buy a loot box or whatever. And honestly, I wouldn't. Now, they are hard to ignore, and I think that's a problem. I think the menus and everything is cluttered with all this crap to buy, and that's gross. I think that feels not cool, especially with a $60 game. I get that these things exist, like, you know, you gotta make money, but I think there's a much better way to do it. There has to be, other than this, like, brute forcing it. Honestly, the bigger problem with me with this game is the fact that there are multiple versions of this game to buy. You know, there's like the $60 version, then there's like the $70 version, and then the $100 version, and they all have different levels of content, like different orc tribes, which is crazy. And I think the other thing too that really bothers me about these microtransactions, you can essentially buy orcs. You buy these orcs that are randomly generated already in the world. They never run out, but you can buy more, better ones, because they're essentially walking loot pinatas. And whatever, okay, but just the fact that you're buying people, like enemies in a game, that feels weird. I don't know. I don't like the way that feels. I think that sets a weird, murky precedent. Now, people think that after the main game ends and then you're playing the end game to get the true ending, you have to buy these loot boxes because the grind is too big. But the way I look at it, honestly, is that the whole structure of Shadow of War is one big grind, so it would make sense for the end game to also be a grind, and it's not that crazy. And while the game isn't pay to win, but I still think the microtransactions are absolutely bad, the biggest thing is really just that it kills the vibe. You know, all this discussion about microtransactions and greedy corporations and they're ruining our games, some of it may be very much right, but it all just... It just deflates me sometimes, you know? You have to feel like that sometimes. You know, it's harder to get excited about a game when the publisher is doing something you don't like and the game is shoving it in your face, and also people can't stop talking about it because they're riled up. That's of course not their fault at all, but you know, it just, you know, it's exhausting. There are also way bigger things going on in the world that matter. But even if there are, we come here for this. So I want to hear what you guys are thinking about Shadow of War and microtransactions. Let's talk in the comments. First of all, do you like the game? Do you like where the story went? Or if you haven't finished it, do you like where the story is going? Are you the type of person that did not buy this game at all? I do want to hear from you. Let's talk about this stuff down in the comments. I'm going to be down there talking to you guys, but you also know where to find me by now. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @JakeBaldino. Hit me up. But thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to me ramble around here. You should subscribe because video games.